At the time, I thought I knew the shape of my life. I believed it was a solid, well-constructed thing, like our Surrey home with its clean lines and tasteful magnolia render. I was Esther, wife to Harvey, mother to Jack. My world was school runs, grocery lists, and the quiet, satisfying rhythm of keeping a home. I mistook the facade for the foundation. I thought the hearth was the whole house. I didn't know I was about to stand on the precipice and watch it all crumble into dust. The air in the garden was thick with the scent of cut grass and the shrieking joy of a dozen 6-year-olds. Jack's birthday party was in full, chaotic swing. A battalion of miniature superheroes and pirates ricocheted across the lawn, their energy fueled by sugar and sunshine. I moved through them like a serene, green-clad ghost, my dress the color of new leaves, a color Harvey had once said brought out the flecks in my eyes. Now I wore it out of habit, a part of the uniform. I was a curator of this happiness, a stage manager for this perfect little play. I straightened a paper crown, refilled a cup of diluted juice, and smiled until my cheeks ached. It was a good ache, the ache of a life well lived. Or so I told myself. Have you seen Harvey? I asked Brian, my neighbor and Harvey's occasional golf partner, as he snagged a sausage roll from a passing platter. Last saw him heading towards the terrace, with a couple of beers, he said, giving me a genial, slightly pitying smile. I was used to that smile. It was the look people gave the hearthkeeper, the reliable one. The boring one. I needed to find Harvey. The cake was due to be brought out soon, a colossal confection of sponge and blue icing in the shape of a spaceship, and it required a father-son moment, a photograph for the album. Another piece of evidence for the case of our wonderful life. I weaved through the clusters of parents, my smile fixed and automatic. I didn't see him at first on the shaded terrace. Then I heard his voice, low and confident, from the other side of the large, wooden-framed swing seat that overlooked the rose garden. He was with someone I couldn't see who. I was about to call out, to step into view, when the timbre of his laugh stopped me. It was a sound I knew intimately relaxed, slightly boastful, the laugh he reserved for business triumphs or a particularly good single malt. I paused, hidden by the thick canvas back of the swing. A silly, girlish impulse made me want to eavesdrop, to hear my husband boasting about our son, our party, our life. I wanted to hear him say, "Esther's outdone herself this time." I leaned back against the cool brick of the house, the rough texture catching on the fine silk of my dress, and prepared to receive my silent, unwitting compliment. "Relax, mate," Harvey was saying, his voice a low, easy rumble. "You worry too much. Esther isn't going anywhere." The statement was so absolute, so possessively certain, it felt like a physical touch. I froze. "Are you sure?" The other man's voice was skeptical, laced with a concern that now felt alien and threatening. "This situation. It's a risk." Harvey chuckled again, and the sound was no longer familiar. It was a stranger's noise, cold and sharp. "It's not a risk, it's a reinvention. Look, a man has different needs. Esther is the hearth. She's home. She's warm, she's comfortable, she's where I keep my things. She's the foundation." My breath hitched. The foundation. A slab of concrete unadorned, walked upon. But this other woman. Kimberly, Brian said the name with distaste, and the world, my solid, well-constructed world, dropped out from under me. The name hung in the air between them, a glittering, poisonous shard. Kimberly. Kimberly, Harvey repeated, and I could hear the slick, smug smile in his voice. Kimberly is fire. She's extreme. She's a bloody good shag, frankly. It's not complicated, mate. One strengthens the other. The hearth and the fire. You need both. I felt the tray I was holding, a tray of untouched, sweating glasses of Pimm's, tilt in my hands. My fingers had gone cold, utterly numb, as if all the blood had rushed to my heart only to find it had ceased to beat. I couldn't breathe. The cheerful shrieks from the garden morphed into a distant, mocking roar. A good shag. Strengthens a marriage. The hearth. And if she finds out? Brian pressed, the voice of a sanity I could no longer access. She won't. Harvey's tone was final, dismissive. It was the voice he used to close a deal. She has no job, no money of her own, nowhere to go. Her entire life is this house, this garden, our son. She's built her own cage, and it's a very comfortable one. She's not going to rock the boat. She doesn't have the guts. Each word was a precise, surgical strike. No job, no money, nowhere to go. A cage. The truth of it was so devastating, so absolute, that my legs trembled. The tray slipped further. A glass wobbled, tipped, and fell. It seemed to take an eternity, tumbling end over end, before it shattered on the terracotta tiles with a sound like a universe breaking. The conversation on the other side of the swing stopped abruptly. "What was that?" Brian said. "Probably the cat," Harvey replied, his voice already shifting back to its public, genial register. "Or one of the kids." Another drink. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned, stumbling on legs that felt like water, and fled back into the house, leaving the shattered glass and the spilled Pims as a monument to the moment my life ended. I made it to the downstairs toilet, locking the door behind me before the first, silent, wrenching sob tore through me. I collapsed against the door, my hand clamped over my mouth, stifling the screams that wanted to erupt. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman in the young green dress, her face pale, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked like madness. Esther, the hearthkeeper, the foundation, the predictable, boring wife in her very comfortable cage. The pain was a physical thing, a hot, twisting knife in my gut. It was the death of something. Not just my marriage, but my idea of myself. Every memory, every touch, every quiet evening, every holiday, it was all retroactively poisoned. Had he been thinking of her? Comparing me? Had he come to me from her bed, his skin smelling of another woman's perfume, and kissed my forehead with pity? The humiliation was a tide, threatening to pull me under. I dry-heaved over the porcelain bowl, my body convulsing with the shock. Kimberly. Fire. Extreme. The words played on a loop, a hellish mantra. I saw a faceless, fiery woman, all passion and danger, a thrilling contrast to my domestic dullness. I was the reliable Aga cooker, she was a forest fire. A sharp rap on the door made me jump. "Esther? You in there?" Harvey's voice. Concerned. Husbandly. A performance. The sound of it, so normal, so fraudulent, acted like a slap. The dizzying, nauseating grief began to recede, replaced by something else. Something cold and hard and sharp. A sliver of ice forming in the wreckage of my heart. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it helping to steady my breathing. I met my own gaze in the mirror. The terror was still there, but something new was kindling behind it. A cold, calculated resolve. He thought I had no guts. He thought I was trapped. He thought I was predictable. He was about to find out how wrong he was. I unlocked the door and forced my face into a weak, watery smile. Harvey stood there, his expression a perfect mask of spousal worry. "There you are. Everything all right?" "Jack's asking for the cake." "I'm fine," I said, my voice a little hoarse. I gestured vaguely, a lie forming on my lips as easily as breath. I was looking for the matches for the candles and I caught my reflection. And I saw the little lines around my eyes. And I thought about Jack being 6. It hit me. He's growing up so fast. I let a single, genuine, traitor tear escape and roll down my cheek. It was the perfect alibi. The sentimental mother, overwhelmed by the passage of time. Harvey's face softened with patronizing understanding. He stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. I let him. My arms hung stiffly at my sides. I could smell his aftershave, the one I'd bought him for Christmas, and beneath it, I imagined I could smell the phantom scent of smoke. Of fire. "Oh, darling," he murmured into my hair. "He's still our little boy. Our little boy." In my cage. With his father who saw me as furniture. He released me, his hands on my shoulders. "Come on. Let's go light the rocket ship." As we walked back into the blinding sunshine, the cheerful noise of the party felt like an assault. But I kept the smile on my face. It was a mask, but it was also my armor. I saw Jack, his face smeared with chocolate, beaming at me, and the ice in my heart cracked for a moment, flooding me with a fresh wave of protective, ferocious love. This was no longer just about my pain. It was about his future. Harvey stayed close to my side, a hand on the small of my back, a gesture that had once felt possessive in a loving way and now felt like the brand of an owner. I watched him laugh with the other fathers, the perfect host, the doting dad, the man with a fire on the side. An idea, dark and vengeful, began to uncoil in the new, cold stillness within me. I would not confront him. Not yet. That would be predictable. That would be what he expected. A scene. Tears. Begging. Or silent, wounded fury. He would have a script for that. He would have his answers ready, his justifications, his patronizing pats on the head. No, I would write a new script. One he wouldn't see coming. I turned to him, my face a perfect picture of wifely affection. Harvey, I began, my voice soft, watching Jack today. It's made me think. Maybe it's time we started trying for another one. The effect was instantaneous and deeply, profoundly satisfying. His smile didn't just falter, it shattered. His eyes widened in a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. He looked, for a single, glorious second, like a man who had just been told the walls of his prison were about to close in permanently. He recovered quickly, his public mask snapping back into place, but it was too late. I had seen it. Another, he stammered, his voice an octave too high. Esther, love, we're a bit old for that, don't you think? And Jack is so independent now, it would be starting all over again. I suppose you're right, I said, letting my voice drip with a convincing, wistful sadness. I looked away, back towards the children. It was just a thought. Inside, I was seething. A grim, internal smile spread through me. Yes, Harvey. Panic. The thought of another child, another chain to your boring hearth, is your worst nightmare, isn't it? Because it would mean less time for your fire. The decision was now absolute, cemented in that moment of his panic. I would not leave in a blaze of tears and accusations. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would plan. I would gather my resources. I would be smarter, colder, and more patient than he could ever imagine. The hearth was about to catch fire, and I would be the one holding the match. The performance had begun. And I, the predictable, boring Esther, was going to give the performance of my life. The facade was not just cracked, it was now a weapon, and I was learning how to wield it. The love was dead. In its place, a cold, hard diamond of resolve was beginning to form. The silence in the house after the party was a physical presence, thick and heavy as wet wool. We moved through the wreckage of the celebration, the discarded paper plates, the deflated balloons, the sticky patches on the floor, like actors after the final curtain, the illusion of the performance lingering in the air. Jack, exhausted and sugar-crashed, was asleep upstairs, his new spaceship toy clutched in his hand. Harvey was in his study, the low murmur of a business call seeping from under the door. The hearthkeeper was clearing up, her movements automatic, her mind 1,000 miles away, plotting the demolition of the very home she was tidying. The first crack in my composure had been sealed with the cold, hard resin of resolve. The grief was still there, a vast, dark ocean inside me, but I had built a raft of ice upon it. I would not drown. I would sail. At 7:30, I heard the familiar sounds from his study, the chair scraping back, the briefcase click, the soft tread on the stairs. He was preparing to leave. The performance was about to begin. I met him in the hallway as he descended, shrugging on his jacket. He looked every inch the respectable, harried husband, the slight frown, the tired eyes. A man called away on urgent, tiresome business. Off again? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. I didn't look at him directly, instead focusing on straightening a framed photograph of Jack on the console table. It was a picture from last year, the three of us on a beach in Cornwall, our faces wind-whipped and happy. A lie. I'm sorry, Esther. That merger. The Hong Kong team needs a conference call. It'll be a late one. Don't wait up. His tone was a masterclass in weary obligation. I let the silence stretch for a beat, just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then I turned and looked at him. I let my gaze be soft, unfocused, as if I were looking through him at a memory. "I know, Harvey," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the quiet hall. He froze, one arm still in his jacket sleeve. "Know what?" I met his eyes then, and I saw a flicker of something primal and fearful in their depths. The predator scenting a trap. "I know you're cheating on me." The words hung in the air, clean and sharp as a guillotine blade. The color drained from his face. For a glorious, heart-stopping second, I saw the foundations of his arrogance tremble. His mouth opened, then closed. He was a man who had just stepped into the void. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice rough. "Esther, that's a hell of a thing to say. What nonsense has gotten into you?" I let his panic build for one more second, savoring the taste of it, metallic and sweet on my tongue. Then I allowed a small, confused frown to crease my brow. I shook my head slightly, as if shaking off a dream. "Cheating with your work, Harvey," I said, my voice layering on a thick coat of wounded wifely concern. "You're cheating me, and you're cheating Jack. You're never here." I gestured vaguely towards the window, towards Brian's house, the seed of my alibi planted days ago. "I was talking to Sarah today. Brian managed to take a half day to be at the party. He's coaching Leo's football team on Saturdays. When was the last time you even kicked a ball with Jack in the garden? Your son is growing up, and you're on a conference call with Hong Kong." The transformation in him was instantaneous. The fear vanished, replaced by a flood of patronizing relief. He finished putting on his jacket, his movements once again smooth and assured. He stepped towards me, and I forced myself not to flinch as he placed a hand on my arm. "Oh, darling. Is that what this is about? You're feeling neglected." He sighed, the long-suffering husband. "This merger is a monster, but it's almost over. I promise. Then things will go back to normal. We'll take that trip to Cornwall, just the three of us." He leaned in to kiss my forehead, and I let him. The touch of his lips was like a brand of ownership. I felt the phantom scent of Kimberly's perfume again, a ghost in the air between us. "I'm sorry I've been distant," he murmured, his voice dripping with false contrition. "I'll make it up to you both." He left then, closing the front door with a soft, final click. I stood in the silent hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. The first salvo had been fired, and it had been a direct hit. I had seen the fear. I had thrown him off balance. And, most importantly, I had planted a seed of doubt in his mind about my own. He now thought I was a slightly hysterical, emotionally needy wife, worried about workaholism. He would be watching for tears, for sulks, for the predictable patterns of a wounded woman. He would not be watching for the strategist. The next morning, the silent war began in earnest. With Harvey gone and Jack at school, the house was my operations center. My first mission, information. I sat at the kitchen island, my laptop open, the screen reflecting the bright, innocent sunshine outside. I typed the words with trembling fingers. Top London divorce lawyers. The list was long and intimidating. I needed someone sharp, ruthless, and, crucially, unknown to Harvey's corporate legal circles. I settled on a name, Alistair Croft of Croft and Monahan. His bio described him as a tenacious litigator with a focus on high-net-worth matrimonial cases. He was also based in a different part of the city. It would have to do. Making the call from the house phone felt too dangerous. Harvey could have the bills itemized. After dropping Jack at school, I drove to a retail park on the outskirts of town, my hands slick on the steering wheel. I parked between two vans, the anonymity a small shield. Using a cheap, pay-as-you-go phone I'd bought with cash from the supermarket, I dialed the number. A clipped, efficient voice answered. "Croft and Monahan." "I'd like to make an appointment with Mr. Alistair Croft, please," I said, my voice unnaturally high. "Regarding a matrimonial matter." "Your name, please." I panicked. It's for a friend. I'm making inquiries on her behalf." The lie felt flimsy, pathetic. There was a pause, the sound of clicking keys. "I see. Mr. Croft has a consultation availability next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Our standard preliminary consultation fee is £500, payable in advance." £500. a sum I couldn't access without Harvey seeing the transaction. I'll have to get back to you, I stammered and ended the call. I sat in the car, the plastic phone hot in my hand, despair lapping at the edges of my icy raft. I was out of my depth. Harvey controlled everything: the money, the assets, the narrative. I was just the hearthkeeper with no resources of my own. But a hearthkeeper knows her domain intimately. That afternoon, I began my inventory. I started with the safe. I knew the combination, our wedding date, a detail Harvey would have considered romantic, but I now saw as sentimental oversight. Inside, I found our passports, Jack's birth certificate, the house deeds, and a stack of bonds. I took nothing. Not yet. But I knew what was there. I photographed the contents with my phone. Next, I turned to the digital realm. Harvey was careless with his passwords, often leaving his laptop open. He used a variation of the same one for everything: Jack's name and birth year. It was the work of minutes to access his email. My stomach churned as I scanned the inbox. There, nestled between corporate newsletters and golf club circulars, was an email from a KS, the subject line: tomorrow night? I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I noted the email address: kimberly.stclair@post.com. I took a screenshot, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Evidence. It was a tiny, digital shard of the truth. A week later, I tried the lawyer again, this time with a new plan. I met Alistair Croft on a bench in St. James's Park, the anonymity of the city a cloak around me. He was a man in his 50s, with sharp, assessing eyes and a suit that cost more than my car. "Mrs." he began, opening a leather-bound notebook. "You can call me Sarah," I said, the name of my neighbor falling easily from my lips. "I'm here for a friend. Her situation is delicate." I laid it out for him, my voice low and steady, as ducks quacked on the pond behind us. I told him about the comfortable cage, the control of finances, the infidelity. I presented the screenshot of the email, the photograph of the safe's contents. "Your friend," he said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe a word of it, "is in a precarious position. Without direct access to marital funds, her options are limited. The courts will look favorably on her as the primary caregiver, but if her husband is as controlling as you say, he may attempt to hide assets or use financial pressure to force an unfavorable settlement." "What does she do?" I asked, the desperation leaking into my voice. "She needs to build a war chest," he said bluntly. "Cash. As much as she can, as quietly as she can. She needs to secure important documents, passports, birth certificates. She should start a diary, a contemporaneous log of everything. And she needs to think about a safe exit." "Does she have family?" "Her mother. In the Cotswolds." "Good. She should begin moving sentimental and essential items there, a few at a time. She must assume she is being watched." The advice was a lifeline and a death sentence. It was a blueprint for the destruction of my life. I paid him from the £200 in cash I had painstakingly withdrawn over the week, £20 here, £40 there, from the supermarket checkout. The gathering of resources began. It was a slow, terrifying ballet. A trip to my mother's, ostensibly to help her with her garden, became a smuggling operation. A bag of Jack's outgrown clothes concealed my own important documents and a few pieces of jewelry my grandmother had left me. Another visit saw my winter coat and a box of my favorite books deposited in her attic. My mother, bless her, asked no questions. She simply hugged me a little tighter and said, "The spare room is always made up, darling." The cash was the hardest part. Harvey gave me a generous monthly allowance for groceries and household expenses, transferred into a joint account from which I could withdraw. I became a miser. I bought cheaper cuts of meat, generic brands, skipped my own small luxuries. I became an expert at getting cash back at every transaction. The notes, folded and hidden, felt like contraband. I stored them in a sealed plastic bag inside a box of tampons at the back of the bathroom cabinet, a place Harvey would never ever look. The emotional toll was immense. Every interaction with Harvey was a performance that drained me. I had to be the Esther he expected, slightly distant, a little sad about his work, but fundamentally placid and predictable. I cooked his favorite meals. I asked about his day. I listened to his stories with a placid smile, all the while screaming inside. The grief was a constant companion. I grieved for the man I thought I'd married, for the future we'd planned, for the innocent happiness of my son. The thrill of the hunt, the cold satisfaction of each small, secret victory, was always tempered by the profound sorrow of its necessity. Harvey, sensing a shift he couldn't name, became increasingly suspicious and controlling. He started calling at odd times, just to check in. Just leaving the supermarket, I'd say, my heart in my throat, as I sat in a lay-by miles away, having just posted another small package of essentials to my mother. "What did you buy?" he asked once, his tone casual, but with an edge. "Oh, just the usual. Pasta, chicken, some fruit for Jack's lunchbox." I recited a bland list, my mind racing. Could he see the itemized transactions online? Was this a test? He began tracking my phone. I discovered it one evening when he casually remarked, "You were a long time at the garden center today. Get lost." I had been at the garden center, but only for 10 minutes before driving to a different town to meet a private investigator I'd found online, another drain on my precious cash reserve. The constant surveillance was a cage within the cage. I felt his eyes on me even when he wasn't there. I started taking different routes to school. I left my phone at home when I went on my clandestine errands, claiming the battery had died. The paranoia was a low-grade fever, always present. The breaking point, and my greatest opportunity, came during a conversation about Jack's education. "St. Bede's has a waiting list a mile long," Harvey grumbled one evening, looking at a school brochure. "We should have put his name down at birth." St. Bede's was the most exclusive and expensive private prep school in the county. "I was thinking of something else," I said, carefully. "The Little Acorns Private Nursery. They have a feeder program directly into St. Bede's. It's very exclusive. Small classes. It would give Jack a real head start." I had done my research. Little Acorns was exclusive, and its fees were astronomical. It was also a complete fiction as far as my intentions were concerned. Harvey looked intrigued. "How much?" I named a figure that made even him blink. $5,000 a term. And there's a non-refundable registration fee of $2,000, payable upfront to secure a place for January. He whistled. "Steep." "It's an investment, Harvey," I said, pouring him a glass of wine, my hand steady. "For Jack's future. You always say you want the best for him." I was using his own language. His own values, against him. He looked at me, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. This was a language he understood. Status. Advantage. A tangible thing he could buy for his son, a counterbalance to his absences. It was also a way to placate me, to keep the predictable hearthkeeper happy with a new project. "All right," he said finally, taking a sip of wine. "If you think it's the best thing, set up a meeting. I'll transfer the funds for the registration fee." 2 days later, £12,000 landed in our joint account. The plan was for me to write a check to the nursery. Instead, I went to the bank. I dressed carefully in the kind of smart, expensive clothes I wore to Harvey's work functions, the uniform of a respectable, wealthy wife. I asked to speak to the manager. I explained, with a conspiratorial whisper, that I was planning a surprise birthday party for my husband, a lavish, cash-only event, and needed to withdraw a large sum without it showing up on our joint statements and spoiling the surprise. I layered on the performance, blushing, playing the doting, slightly silly wife. The manager, a man who knew Harvey by reputation, smiled indulgently. The patriarchy, I was learning, had its uses. He facilitated the withdrawal. I walked out of the bank with £12,000 in used notes in my handbag. The weight of it was terrifying, exhilarating. It was freedom, condensed into paper bricks. It was my war chest. That night, Harvey was in a good mood. The deal with the Hong Kong team had closed successfully. He was expansive, pouring himself a whiskey, talking about bonuses and new cars. He pulled me onto his lap on the sofa, a gesture that once felt loving and now felt like a violation. "We should celebrate," he said, his breath warm against my neck. "A weekend away. Just us." We can get your mother to have Jack." The thought of being alone with him, of having to perform intimacy, made my skin crawl. But I smiled, tracing the collar of his shirt. "That sounds wonderful. But let's wait until after the Little Acorns meeting next week. I want to have that sorted for Jack first." He nodded, nuzzling my hair. "You're a wonderful mother, Esther. You really are." The hypocrisy was so vast it stole my breath. I looked over his shoulder, out of the window at the darkening garden. The hearth. The foundation. The comfortable cage. But the keeper of the hearth now had matches and fuel and a plan. The silent war was underway, and I was no longer just a prisoner plotting escape. I was a general preparing for battle. And I was learning that the most dangerous enemy is not the one who shouts their rage, but the one who has learned to smile while sharpening a knife. The war chest hidden in the tampon box was more than just money, it was a seed of audacity. With every folded note I added, a new layer of steel reinforced my spine. The initial, paralyzing grief had been forged in the fires of betrayal into a weapon of cold focus. I was no longer just gathering resources, I was learning to wield them. The next phase required not just stealth, but a bold, public strike. It was time to leave the Surrey battlefield and take the war to his territory. I chose a Wednesday. Harvey's midweek lie was always the same, a late evening strategy session followed by drinks with the Hong Kong team, a conveniently distant and unverifiable alibi. I knew, with the certainty of a woman who has studied her enemy's patterns, that he would be with Kimberly. But not in a bar. In his office. The scene of his corporate triumphs would become the stage for his personal humiliation. I dressed with deliberate, wifely care. A simple but elegant navy dress, pearl studs in my ears, my hair soft around my shoulders. I looked like the picture of supportive spousehood. I told my mother I had a last-minute dentist appointment and needed her to collect Jack from school. She agreed without question, her silence a testament to the unspoken understanding growing between us. The train to London felt like a journey into the heart of the beast. My reflection in the window was a calm stranger. I rehearsed my lines not in my head, but in my soul. This was not about confrontation. It was about theater. I was going to perform the role of a lifetime, and Harvey would be my unwitting, trapped co-star. His office was in a gleaming steel and glass monolith in the city. I'd only been a handful of times for Christmas parties, where I'd played the part of the charming, unassuming wife to perfection. I walked through the revolving doors, my heels clicking on the polished marble floor, a smile already fixed on my face. "I'm here to see Harvey," I told the receptionist, my voice light and friendly. Esther, his wife. "It's a surprise." She gave me a professional smile and buzzed me through. The open-plan office was a hive of muted activity, the air humming with the sound of keyboards and low voices. I moved through it like a ghost, a familiar yet alien presence. I saw a few faces I recognized. They offered hesitant smiles and waves, which I returned with a serene nod. Harvey's office was at the end of a corridor, his name etched on the glass door in bold, masculine lettering, Harvey Drake, Managing Director. The door was slightly ajar. My heart was a steady, determined drumbeat, not a flutter of nerves in sight. I pushed it open. He was at his desk, his back to the door, staring out at the panoramic view of the London skyline. He was on the phone, his voice the low, confident rumble I knew so well. "Don't worry, it's all sorted. The dragon has been slain for another night. I'm just finishing up some paperwork, and then I'm all yours." I didn't need to hear the response to know who was on the other end of the line. The intimate timbre of his voice was all the confirmation I needed. I took a silent step into the room, my eyes performing a swift, tactical scan. And that's when I saw it. The tiny telling detail. The fly of his impeccably tailored trousers was undone, the white of his shirt a stark contrast to the dark wool. A shard of ice-cold clarity pierced through me. He hadn't just been talking to her. She was here. Now. My gaze snapped to the only other hiding place in the room, the floor-to-ceiling supply closet in the corner. The door was closed, but as I watched, I saw it shift, just a millimeter, as if someone on the other side had leaned against it. A faint, floral scent, expensive, unfamiliar, and utterly out of place in this sterile environment of leather and old paper, hung in the air. Kimberly. A fury, so pure and cold it felt like a divine force, filled me. This was his temple of power, and he had defiled it. He had brought his fire into his professional sanctuary, reducing it to the level of a cheap motel. The humiliation I had felt in the garden was nothing compared to the contempt that washed over me now. Harvey swiveled in his chair, sensing a presence. When he saw me, his face went through a rapid, comical series of emotions: surprise, annoyance, and then, as his brain processed my presence and the state of his own dress, pure, unadulterated panic. His hand flew to his crotch, fumbling to rectify the situation. "Esther, what the hell are you doing here?" he hissed, covering the phone's mouthpiece. I didn't answer. I simply smiled, a slow, gentle, wifely smile. I walked calmly to the visitor's chair opposite his desk and sat down, smoothing my dress over my knees. I crossed my legs, letting one shoe dangle from my toe, a picture of nonchalance. "I'll have to call you back," he muttered into the phone and hung up without waiting for a reply. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint, rhythmic tick of the antique clock on his shelf. "Well," he demanded, his voice tight. The panic was receding, replaced by bluster. "This is a surprise. Is everything all right? Is Jack okay?" "Jack is fine," I said, my voice a soft, placid pool. "I was in the area. I had a dentist appointment. And I thought I'd pop in. You've been working so hard lately, Harvey." I was worried. I let my gaze drift meaningfully around the office, letting it linger for a fraction of a second too long on the closet door. "You look stressed." He followed my gaze, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. "I'm not stressed. I'm busy. This isn't a good time, Esther." "Oh, I won't be long," I said, picking up a heavy crystal paperweight from his desk and turning it over in my hands. "I just wanted to see where you spend all your time. Where the real work gets done." I placed the paperweight back with a soft, definitive click. "It's very impressive. So, private." A tiny noise, a stifled cough or a shuffle, came from the closet. Harvey flinched as if he'd been shot. "What was that?" I asked, my eyes wide with innocent curiosity. "Nothing. The ventilation system. It's noisy." His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of his desk. "I see." I leaned back in the chair, making myself comfortable. "You know, Harvey, while I'm here, there was something I wanted to discuss. About Jack's school. Can't this wait?" he pleaded, his eyes darting towards the door, willing me to leave. "It'll only take a moment." I proceeded to talk, in excruciating, mundane detail, about the merits of the Little Acorns nursery versus its competitor, the Oak Tree School. I discussed teacher-to-student ratios, extracurricular offerings, and the philosophical differences in their pedagogical approaches. I spoke for 20 minutes, my voice a calm, relentless drone. All the while, I watched him. I watched the sweat bead on his temple. I watched his jaw clench and unclench. I watched his eyes flicker again and again to the closet, imagining the woman trapped inside, standing amidst stationery and toner cartridges, listening to the inane domestic details of the life she was trying to infiltrate. I was torturing them both. Him, with the threat of my presence and my willful ignorance. Her, with the sound of the wife, the hearth, calmly discussing their son's future while she hid in a dark cupboard like a dirty secret. So, I concluded, what do you think? The Oak Tree School has a more robust music program, but Little Acorns has better security. I'm so torn. Your opinion matters so much to me, Harvey. He was barely listening. Whatever you think is best, Esther. You're the expert. Am I? I asked softly. Sometimes I wonder if you think I'm an expert in anything at all. Another hour passed. I moved from topic to topic. The leaky tap in the guest bathroom. My mother's arthritis. The need to repaint the garden fence. I was a slow, dripping tap of wifely concerns, each drop eroding his composure. He was a caged animal, pacing mentally, if not physically. Every time he made a move to stand, to end this, I would start on a new, seemingly urgent subject. Oh, and Harvey, before I forget, the car is making a funny noise. A sort of rattling sound. Like something is loose and shaking itself to pieces. He stared at me, and in his eyes I saw a dawning, horrifying suspicion. Was she doing this on purpose? Could she know? But my face was a mask of sincere, slightly boring concern. The Esther he knew was capable of monologuing about fence paint. The cognitive dissonance was breaking him. Finally, after 2 full hours of this exquisite torment, I glanced at my watch and gave a little gasp. Goodness, is that the time? I told Mum I'd be back to relieve her by 7. I should go. I stood up slowly, deliberately. Harvey looked like a man reprieved from the gallows. The relief was so palpable it was a stench in the room. Of course. Don't want to keep her waiting. He practically leapt from his chair, eager to usher me out. I walked to the door, then paused, turning back. Oh, and Harvey? Yes, darling. The darling was strained, a frayed wire. Try not to work too late, I said, my gaze drifting once more, pointedly, to the supply closet. You need your rest. A man can't run on empty forever. Sooner or later, something has to give. I left then, closing the door softly behind me. I didn't look back. I walked through the office, my head high, a serene smile on my face. I didn't need to see the aftermath. I could feel it. I had ruined his evening. I had poisoned his secret space. I had held the match to his precious fire and watched it sputter and smoke, trapped and suffocating in a closet. The victory was a potent, heady draft. But the hangover was waiting for me at home. It arrived 2 days later, in a plain manila envelope with no return address. It was mixed in with the usual bills and catalogs. My name and address were printed in a generic, anonymous font. A cold dread trickled down my spine. I took it into the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly. I slid it open with a knife. Inside were a dozen sheets of paper, printed copies of text message conversations. My eyes scanned the first one, and the world tilted on its axis. Harvey, can't stop thinking about last night. You were incendiary. Kimberly, I aim to please. Unlike your frigid wife. Does she even know what she's missing? Harvey, Esther? God, no. She's the hearth, remember? Warm and comfortable. You're the bloody inferno. A good shag versus a cup of cocoa. No contest. Kimberly, I want a contest. I want to win. Harvey, you already have my fire. You already have. I physically recoiled, the paper falling from my hands as if it were coated in acid. Frigid wife. Cup of cocoa. A good shag. The words from the garden, now given a digital, immortal form. They were even more vile in print. More real. I forced myself to pick them up, to read every sickening exchange. The plans for their meetings. The comparisons between us. The explicit, graphic descriptions of what they did together, details that seared themselves onto my retinas. Harvey, my husband, the father of my child, reduced his intimacy with me to a pathetic, domestic metaphor while graphically detailing his escapades with her. The pain was no longer a hot knife, it was 1,000 shards of glass in my veins. It was visceral, a nausea that rose from the very core of my being. I stumbled to the sink, dry heaving, the printed pages scattered on the floor like the shed skin of a serpent. There was no doubt in my mind who had sent it. This was Kimberly's work. A twisted power play, a shot across the bow from the fire who now saw me as a direct threat. It didn't matter what her precise motive was, the effect was the same. It was a deliberate act of cruelty, designed to wound, to humiliate, to shatter whatever fragile piece I had built. I sank to the floor, the cold tiles a shock against my skin. I gathered the pages, my tears falling now, hot and silent. This was the evidence Alistair Croft had told me to gather. This was the ammunition for my war. But holding it in my hands felt like holding a live grenade. It was destroying me first. I cried for a long time, the sobs racking my body. I cried for the final, brutal death of the man I loved. I cried for the violation, for the sheer, ugly vulgarity of it all. The performance, the strength, the cold resolve, it all melted away in the face of this raw, printed proof of my inadequacy and his contempt. But then, as the storm of grief began to subside, a new emotion emerged from the wreckage. Not coldness. Not calculation. Rage. A clean, sharp, clarifying rage. This was no longer just about escape. It was about annihilation. The encounter in the car park was my next move, born from that rage. The opportunity presented itself perfectly. Harvey, in a rare and likely guilt-induced gesture, had offered to take Jack to his office for a bring-your-child-to-work day. I agreed, my voice sweet with false appreciation. I would pick Jack up at 4. I arrived early. I parked where I could observe the main entrance. I saw Harvey emerge with Jack, his hand held tightly. My heart clenched at the sight of my son, so small and trusting beside the man who was betraying us both. Harvey handed Jack over to his PA, who led him towards the building. Harvey lingered, looking at his phone. A moment later, a woman emerged from a side door. She was tall, slender, dressed in a sharp, crimson power suit. Her hair was a sheet of glossy black, and she walked with a confident, almost aggressive sway. Kimberly. Fire. My timing was impeccable. As Harvey disappeared back inside, I got out of my car and walked purposefully towards the main entrance, intercepting her just as she reached a sleek, silver sports car. "Excuse me," I said, my voice polite, friendly. She turned, her expression one of mild annoyance. She was beautiful in a hard, polished way. Her eyes were a piercing blue, and they assessed me in a single, dismissive glance. "Yes!" I extended my hand, my smile warm and genuine. "I'm Esther. Esther Drake. Harvey's wife." The effect was electric. Her face, a moment ago a mask of impatient beauty, went slack with shock. The color drained from her cheeks. She looked at my outstretched hand as if it were a venomous snake. I know who you are," she stammered, her composure cracking. "Of course you do," I said, my hand still hanging in the air between us. I didn't waver. My gaze was steady, my smile unwavering. "I just wanted to introduce myself properly. And to thank you." That broke her completely. "Thank me," she echoed, bewildered. "Yes," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial, almost sisterly tone. I finally lowered my hand, but I took a step closer, invading her personal space. You see, for the longest time, I was worried that Harvey's long hours and distractions were a sign he was falling out of love with me, with our family. I let the words hang in the air, watching her process them. Her eyes were wide, confused. But recently, I continued, my voice soft but laced with steel, he's been so much more attentive, so much more present. He told me everything, you see. He said that being with you made him realize what he has at home. That what he has with me is the great love of his life. The real thing. And that you were just a bit of fun. A distraction. A fire, he called you. Bright, but destined to burn out. I saw the blow land. I saw the insecurity, the volatile nature Harvey had so admired, now turned against her. Her jaw tightened. A flash of pure, undiluted hatred sparked in her eyes. "You're lying," she whispered, but there was no conviction in it. "Am I?" I gave a light, tinkling laugh. "Why do you think he's suddenly so keen on trying for another baby?" "He's reinvesting in his hearth." "So, thank you, Kimberly. You've been the catalyst we needed." I didn't wait for a response. I gave her one last, pitying smile, as if she were a foolish child who had accidentally done me a great service, and turned away. I walked back to my car, my back straight, every cell in my body singing with a fierce, triumphant energy. I didn't look back, but I could feel her stare, hot and furious, boring into me. The mistress, left standing in a car park, rattled, insecure, and seething. I had taken Harvey's metaphor, the hearth and the fire, and turned it back on them both. I had positioned myself not as the victim, but as the victor. The great love. The unshakable foundation. As I drove away, the printed messages felt less like a grenade and more like a key. The power dynamics had irrevocably shifted. Harvey was panicking, trapped between a wife he no longer understood and a mistress I had just poisoned with doubt. I was no longer just weaving a web of escape. I was the spider, and they were both stumbling into my silken, invisible strands. The web was tightening, and soon, neither the hearth nor the fire would be able to move without my permission. The web was spun. Every silken strand, my feigned indifference, my wifely concern, my secret war chest, my poison-tipped words to Kimberly, was in place. Now it was time to lure the spider, or in this case, the fly, into the center. The fly, however, believed he was the predator. I would use that arrogance to spring the final trap. The plan was a delicate, dangerous ballet. It required a misdirection, so convincing that Harvey's own certainty would blind him. I began to craft the persona of a woman having an affair. It was the one transgression he would never suspect from his predictable, boring hearthkeeper, and therefore the one he would most readily believe once the seeds were planted. I started small. I bought a new, cheap mobile phone, a burner with cash. I would take clandestine calls on it in the garden, speaking in a low, intimate murmur that trailed off when Harvey appeared at the window. I let him accidentally find a receipt for a bottle of expensive perfume I never wore, tucked into the pocket of a coat I rarely used. I began taking long, unexplained drives, returning with a faint, secretive smile that I would quickly wipe away when I saw him. The final, irresistible bait was a single, printed email. I composed it on a public computer at the library, from a new, anonymous account, and sent it to my own primary email address, the one Harvey occasionally monitored. It was short, deliberately vague, and damning. Friday, 7 p.m. Usual place. I can't wait. This has to end soon. I'm tired of sharing you. Yours, Jay. I left the printout on the passenger seat of my car, half hidden under a map. I knew he would find it. He was watching me like a hawk now, his suspicion a palpable force in the house. He had become a stranger, this man I lived with, his eyes constantly assessing, his mind working to solve the puzzle of my changed behavior. He thought I was the mystery. He didn't realize he was staring at the decoy. Friday arrived, heavy with impending rain. The air was thick and charged, the sky a bruised purple. I dressed with care, but not in my usual wifely uniform. I wore a black dress I hadn't worn in years, one he'd once said made me look mysterious. I applied my makeup with a heavier hand, a slash of red lipstick that felt like war paint. Going out? Harvey asked, his voice carefully neutral. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, a glass of water in his hand, but his posture was rigid. Yes, I said, not meeting his eyes, busying myself with my handbag. Just meeting a friend. For a drink. I won't be late. Which friend? The question was a knife. Oh, just Sarah, I lied smoothly. She's having a rough time with Brian. You know how it is. I glanced at the clock, a nervous, furtive gesture I knew he would catch. I have to go. I felt his gaze on my back all the way to the car. As I pulled out of the driveway, my eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Right on cue, the garage door began to rumble open. His black Range Rover emerged, a predator sliding from its lair. A grim, cold smile touched my lips. He had taken the bait. The drive to London was a surreal, out-of-body experience. The storm broke and rain lashed the windscreen, the wipers struggling to keep pace. My heart was a steady, metronomic beat against my ribs. There was no fear, only a crystalline focus. I was an actress, a general, and a demolition expert, all rolled into one. My destination was not a secret lover's nest, but the Shard, a glittering needle of glass and steel piercing the London skyline. I had used my burner phone, in a voice disguised by a scarf over the mouthpiece, to book a table for two at a restaurant on the 31st floor, in the name of Mr. J. Smith. A reservation Harvey could easily unearth with a few calls. The usual place. But I did not go to the restaurant. I parked in a public car park adjacent to the building, my movements swift and sure. In my handbag, nestled beside my wallet and keys, was a thick manila envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, meticulously drawn up by Alistair Croft and delivered to my mother's house. They were my weapon, my declaration of war. I walked through the pounding rain, not towards the hotel's grand entrance, but towards the sleek, modern apartment block next door, a newer, equally exclusive high-rise. I had done my research. Apartment 42B, Kimberly St. Clair. The Fire's address. I entered the lobby, a cavernous space of marble and modern art. The concierge looked up, but I offered him a confident, tight-lipped smile and walked purposefully towards the elevators as if I belonged. I had gambled on the building's security being lax for a residence guest during a busy Friday evening. I won. The elevator doors slid shut, and I pressed the button for the 4th floor. My heart was no longer a metronome, it was a wild drum. This was the point of no return. There would be no more secrets, no more hidden maneuvers. This was the battlefield. As I approached apartment 42B, I saw that the door was not quite closed. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had been in too much of a hurry to close it properly. A sliver of warm, golden light spilled into the cool, gray corridor. My breath hitched. This was it. The final piece of the stage was set. I pushed the door open. The scene before me was not one of passionate, clandestine love. It was one of frantic, panicked confrontation. Harvey was there, his back to me, his shoulders tense. And Kimberly was facing him, her beautiful face contorted with fury. They were in a tight, aggressive embrace, but it was not romantic. His hands were on her upper arms, not in a caress, but in a grip, holding her back or holding her close. It was impossible to tell. Her crimson nails were dug into the sleeves of his coat. "Calm down, Kim. What the hell has gotten into you?" Harvey was saying, his voice a low, angry growl. You told her I was just a bit of fun." A fire to burn out, she shrieked, her voice raw. Was any of it real, Harvey? Or was I just a good shag to make you appreciate your precious hearth? They were so consumed by their own drama, the script I had written for them, that they didn't hear me enter. I stood there for a moment, a silent specter in the doorway, taking in the expensive, minimalist decor, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a dizzying view of the storm-racked city. This was where my life savings, my family security, had been spent. I never said that. Harvey lied, his voice desperate. She's lying. She's trying to drive a wedge between us. Then why is she so calm? Why did she think me? Kimberly's voice broke on a sob of pure rage. It was then that Harvey, sensing a shift in the air, turned his head. His eyes met mine. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse. His grip on Kimberly slackened, and she stumbled back, following his gaze. When she saw me, her expression shifted from heartbreak to venomous hatred. "Esther," Harvey breathed, the word a ghost of sound. I didn't look at Kimberly. My eyes were locked on my husband, the man who had built my cage, the man who had reduced me to a metaphor. I felt the weight of the envelope in my hand, the heft of all my pain and planning. "We're getting a divorce, Harvey," I said. My voice was not a scream. It was not a whisper. It was a statement of fact, clean and absolute, like the slice of a scalpel. I didn't throw the papers with dramatic flair. I took 2 steps forward and let the envelope fall from my fingers. It didn't flutter. It landed with a solid, definitive thwack on the polished concrete floor between us, a white tombstone on our marriage. The shock in the room was a physical entity. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, the explosion. Harvey's face twisted, the fear and shock morphing into incandescent rage. He wasn't angry about the divorce. He was angry that I, the predictable, had been unpredictable. That I, the controlled, had seized control. "You set this up. You led me here." He took a step towards me, his hands clenching into fists. The civilized veneer he wore in Surrey was gone, stripped away to reveal the raw, entitled man beneath. Kimberly let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. "You stupid bitch," she spat. "You think you've won? You've just made it easier for him." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran. The chase was on. I heard Harvey's roar of fury, the clatter of his footsteps behind me. I didn't wait for the elevator. I flung myself into the stairwell, my heels echoing on the concrete steps. I could hear him above, his heavier, faster footsteps gaining on me. Fear, the first real fear I'd felt all night, lent wings to my feet. I burst out into the car park, the rain instantly soaking my hair and dress. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. I could hear Harvey shouting my name, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. I got the car started, the engine roaring to life. I reversed out of the space with a screech of tires. In my rearview mirror, I saw Harvey sprint towards his Range Rover, parked arrogantly across 2 spaces. The rain was a solid sheet now, turning the world into a smeared watercolor of lights and shadows. My windscreen wipers were useless. I sped out of the car park, taking a sharp right onto the slick city street. A glance in the mirror confirmed it. His hulking Range Rover was right behind me, his headlights blinding me. He was chasing me. Through the streets of London, in a torrential downpour, my husband was chasing me like I was a criminal. The absurdity, the terror, the sheer adrenaline of it all fused into a single, driving imperative: get away. I took corners too fast. The car skidding, tires losing their grip on the oily asphalt. He was a better driver, more aggressive, his vehicle a tank against my small sedan. He rode my bumper, his horn blaring, a relentless, angry beast. We came to a T-junction. The light was red. I had to stop. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt. Harvey pulled up beside me, his window rolling down. His face was a mask of pure, unhinged fury. "Pull over, Esther." Now, he screamed over the pounding rain. I shook my head, my tears mingling with the rain on my face. The light turned green. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. He did the same, surging forward, trying to cut me off. It happened in a slow-motion nightmare. I swerved to avoid his car, turning sharply into the side street. My tires hit a patch of standing water. The car hydroplaned, the steering wheel becoming useless in my hands. I was a passenger in my own doom. The world spun in a dizzying carousel of blurred lights and screaming metal. There was a sickening, deafening crunch as the front of my car plowed into the driver's side of his stationary Range Rover. The impact threw me forward. My seatbelt locked, digging viciously into my shoulder and chest. My head snapped forward and then back, a starburst of pain exploding behind my eyes. The world went silent for a moment, the only sound the hiss of rain on hot metal and the frantic, dying tick of my engine. Then, the driver's door was wrenched open. Harvey's face appeared, wild-eyed, his own rage replaced by a different kind of panic. "Esther. Esther, are you all right?" His hands were on me, fumbling with my seatbelt. I flinched away from his touch, a fresh wave of nausea and pain washing over me. Something warm and wet was trickling down my temple. I touched my fingers to it, and they came away red. "Get away from me," I slurred, my head pounding. "Don't touch me." He ignored me, unbuckling the belt and pulling me from the wreckage. My legs buckled, and I collapsed against him. The scent of his cologne, the feel of his wool coat against my cheek, it was the most intimate we had been in months, and it was a grotesque parody of care. "I hate you," I whispered, the words thick with blood and tears. I began to struggle, pushing against his chest with what little strength I had left. "I hate you, I hate you, I hate you." My screams ripped through the rainy night, raw and primal. I beat my fists against his chest, my movements uncoordinated, fueled by a lifetime of suppressed rage and the fresh, blinding pain in my head. He grabbed my wrists, his grip like iron. "Stop it, Esther. You're hurt. You're bleeding." He was shouting, trying to contain me, to control the situation as he always did. "Let me go. I'd rather die here than let you touch me again." He didn't let go. He half-dragged, half-carried me to his damaged Range Rover, shoved me into the passenger's seat, and slammed the door. I fumbled for the handle, but the child lock was on. I was trapped. Again. He drove like a man possessed to the nearest A&E. The journey was a blur of streetlights and my own silent, shuddering sobs. The cut on my forehead had started to throb in time with my heartbeat. In the bright, sterile chaos of the emergency room, the performance continued, but now for a public audience. Harvey played the part of the terrified, devoted husband to perfection, his arm around me, his voice tight with concern as he spoke to the triage nurse. "My wife. There was a car accident. She hit her head." I sat stiffly in the plastic chair, refusing to lean into him. The nurse, a woman with kind, tired eyes, noted my resistance, the way I shrank from Harvey's touch. She saw the blood, the tear-streaked makeup, the wild look in my eyes. We were shown into a curtained cubicle. A young doctor arrived, his demeanor calm and efficient. It was Brian, my neighbor, Harvey's golf partner, the man who had been privy to the original, garden-variety betrayal. His eyes widened slightly when he saw us, a flicker of professional detachment overriding his personal surprise. "Harvey? Esther? My God, what happened?" Car accident, Harvey said brusquely, his grip on my shoulder tightening. She swerved in the rain. Hit my car. Banged her head pretty hard. Brian's gaze shifted to me, assessing, clinical. Esther, can you tell me what happened? I opened my mouth, but Harvey answered for me. She's confused, Brian. In shock. I'd like to hear it from Esther, Brian said gently but firmly. He began his examination, shining a light in my eyes, checking my pupils, cleaning the cut on my forehead. The sting of the antiseptic was a welcome, grounding pain. Harvey paced the small space like a caged tiger. The adrenaline from the chase and the crash was fading, leaving behind the raw, ugly truth of the evening. This is your fault, he hissed at me, his voice low so Brian wouldn't hear, but the venom was unmistakable. This melodrama, this stunt. Dragging our private life through the streets of London. What were you thinking, going to her apartment? Brian's hands stilled for a fraction of a second. He didn't look up, but I knew he had heard. I was serving you divorce papers, I said, my voice hoarse but clear. You were too busy with your fire to notice I'd stopped tending the hearth. Harvey stopped pacing. The word fire hung in the air between us, a shared, poisonous secret. Brian finally looked up, his eyes darting from my resolute face to Harvey's livid one. The pieces were clicking into place. You led me there. Harvey exploded, his control finally snapping. The curtain was not soundproof. Heads would be turning outside. You planned the whole thing. You've been lying and scheming and God knows what else. Who is J. Esther? Who have you been whoring yourself out to? The accusation was so ludicrous, so perfectly projected, that a bitter laugh escaped my lips. There is no J. Harvey. There's only you. And her. It's always only been you. The argument escalated, a furious, whispered war in the sterile cubicle. He accused me of insanity, of neglect, of driving him away. I threw Kimberly's name back in his face, the printed messages, the conversation in the garden. We were tearing each other apart, stripping the last vestiges of dignity from our ruined marriage. Brian tried to intervene. Harvey, Esther, please. This isn't the place. Esther, I need you to calm down. For the baby. The world stopped. Harvey froze, his mouth still open on a silent retort. I stared at Brian, uncomprehending. What? Harvey said, the word a blunt instrument. Brian looked stricken, realizing his mistake. He looked down at the chart in his hands, at the results that had just come back from the routine blood work. I'm sorry, I thought you knew. The pregnancy test. It's positive. Esther, you're about 6 weeks along. The silence that followed was more deafening than the crash. The air was sucked from the room. All the anger, the pain, the strategic fury evaporated, leaving behind a vast, terrifying emptiness. I looked down at my own body, my hands instinctively going to my stomach. A life. Growing inside me. Conceived in a moment of duty or habit, a universe away from the love that had created Jack. A child born of a corpse of a marriage. I looked at Harvey. The rage on his face had been replaced by something else, something far more terrifying, a cold, calculating horror. This changed everything. This was no longer just about alimony and asset division. This was about another 18 years of obligation. Another chain. His panic in the garden when I'd floated the idea was nothing compared to the sheer, unvarnished dread in his eyes now. The final illusion shattered. There was no going back. The precipice I had been standing on for months had finally crumbled, and I was falling into an unknown future, with a new life tethered to me, and the wreckage of the old one burning behind me. The point of no return was not the crash, nor the confrontation. It was this silent, devastating bombshell in a bright white room, with the three of us frozen in a tableau of utter ruin. The war was over. A new, more complicated battle had just begun. The silence in the hospital cubicle was a physical weight, pressing the air from my lungs. The hiss of the rain outside, the distant, muffled page for a doctor over the hospital tannoy, it all receded into a dull, underwater hum. The only thing real was the phantom sensation deep in my belly, a tiny, cellular secret that had just been weaponized. Pregnant. Harvey's voice was a strangled thing, stripped of all its former confidence and rage. He stared at Brian as if he'd just pronounced a death sentence. Brian looked acutely uncomfortable, a man who had stumbled into a minefield. The blood test is conclusive. About 6 weeks. He cleared his throat, his gaze flicking to me with a mixture of pity and professional concern. Given the accident, we'll need to do an ultrasound, monitor things closely. There's a risk of... A risk, Harvey interrupted, the word a spark on Tinder. His eyes, wide and shell-shocked, swiveled to me. The calculation I saw in them was instantaneous and chilling. The dread I'd witnessed a second ago was now being rapidly processed, filed away under liability and leverage. Esther? Did you know? The question was an accusation. I could only shake my head, my throat too tight for words. My mind was a frantic scramble. 6 weeks. The timeline was a cruel joke. It would have been conceived during one of our perfunctory, late-night couplings, a transaction of habit in the cold expanse of our king-sized bed. A life created in the shadow of his infidelity, a biological trap sprung in the wreckage of my escape plan. This changes everything, Harvey murmured, more to himself than to us. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, and I saw the ghost of a new strategy forming behind his eyes. The furious husband was receding, replaced by the corporate tactician. A new asset had entered the negotiation. Or a new liability to be managed. For me, it changed nothing and everything. The path to freedom, so carefully plotted, was now obscured by a thick, unexpected fog. This wasn't a baby, it was a chain. A golden, unbreakable link that would bind me to Harvey Drake for the rest of my life. 18 more years of financial dependency, of shared decisions, of his controlling presence looming over school plays and graduation ceremonies. The comfortable cage now had a second, smaller lock. The thought, cold and brutal, surfaced from the depths of my panic. I can't have this child. It was not a decision, not yet. It was a primal, survivalist reflex. The thought of carrying Harvey's betrayal inside me, of nurturing it and giving it life, was a violation too profound to bear. The image of Kimberly's furious, beautiful face flashed behind my eyes. Would he bring the child to see her? Would my son or daughter call her Auntie Kim? A dry, hacking sob escaped me. I doubled over, the pain in my head and the nausea in my gut merging into a single, overwhelming wave of despair. Harvey misinterpreted the source of my anguish. He saw a mother, overwhelmed. The predator sensed vulnerability. He moved to my side, his hand descending onto my back. The touch was meant to be comforting, but it felt like the clamp of a trap. "It's all right, darling," he said, his voice softening into a grotesque parody of tenderness. "It's going to be all right. We'll figure this out." A baby. My God. He infused the last word with a forced, wondrous awe that made my skin crawl. I flinched away from his hand. "Don't touch me." His jaw tightened, but he maintained the act for Brian's benefit. "She's in shock," he explained to our neighbor, his tone implying a shared, masculine understanding of hysterical women. Brian's expression remained unreadably professional. "I'll arrange for the ultrasound. And I'll have a midwife come speak to you. You both need to process this." He left the cubicle with a swiftness that spoke of his desire to be anywhere else. The moment the curtain swished shut, Harvey's grip on my shoulder tightened. "Listen to me," he hissed, his mouth close to my ear. "This is a mess. A catastrophic mess. But it's our mess. Our child." I stared at the flecks of blood on my black dress. "Is it?" The question hung in the air, poisonous and deliberate. He recoiled as if I'd struck him. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means you haven't been the only one playing away from home, Harvey." The lie came to me fully formed, a desperate, defensive strike. I had no other man. But he didn't know that. Let him taste a fraction of the doubt and humiliation I had been force-fed. His face contorted, a kaleidoscope of fury, confusion, and a fresh, searing panic. The foundation of his certainty, already cracked, now threatened to implode. If the child wasn't his. The financial implications, the blow to his ego, the potential loss of an heir, I saw it all flash through his mind. "You lying bitch," he whispered, his voice trembling with a new kind of fear. The ultrasound was a surreal, out-of-body experience. The cool gel on my stomach, the dark screen, the technician's calm, monotone instructions. Harvey stood by the wall, his arms crossed, a statue of suppressed rage and suspicion. He couldn't decide which was worse, that the child was his, binding him to me forever, or that it wasn't, making him a cuckold in the most public way imaginable. Then, a sound filled the small, dark room. A rapid, rhythmic whooshing, like galloping horses heard from a great distance. A heartbeat. The technician smiled. And there we are. Strong fetal heartbeat. Everything looks perfectly normal so far, given the circumstances. The sound was a lasso thrown around my heart. It was no longer an abstract concept, a problem to be solved. It was a life with a heartbeat. My child. Jack's sibling. A fresh wave of grief, so profound it felt like dying, washed over me. I wanted this baby. I had always wanted another child. And now the possibility was the source of my greatest despair. I looked at Harvey. The sound of the heartbeat had clarified things for him, too. The brief, terrifying possibility of it not being his was gone. This was his blood. His asset. His new point of control. Normal, he repeated, the word dripping with a new, grim satisfaction. Good. That's very good. The ride home was conducted in a silence more hostile than any argument. The storm had passed, leaving the streets gleaming and empty under a bruised, pre-dawn sky. Harvey drove with a rigid, focused intensity. I leaned my head against the cold window, the throb in my temple a dull counterpoint to the frantic galloping echo in my mind. He thought he had won. He thought the pregnancy was a checkmate. He didn't understand that for me, it had simply moved the war to a new, more brutal battlefield. We pulled into the driveway of our Surrey home. The house stood there, its clean lines and tasteful magnolia render a monument to the life I was determined to burn to the ground. It looked like a home. It felt like a tomb. Harvey unlocked the front door and stepped inside. I followed, my body moving on autopilot. He stopped in the center of the hallway, his head cocked. The silence was different. It wasn't just the quiet of a sleeping house, it was the absolute, hollow silence of an empty one. "Jack," he called out, his voice unnaturally loud. No answering thud of small feet, no sleepy murmur. He took the stairs 2 at a time. I heard his footsteps pounding down the upstairs hallway, the creak of Jack's bedroom door. A moment of silence, then his footsteps again, heavier this time, descending the stairs. He appeared in the hallway entrance, his face a mask of cold fury. "Where is he?" "He's with my mother," I said, my voice flat. "I took him there this morning. Before everything. You took my son to your mother's house without discussing it with me?" Each word was a chip of ice. "He's my son too. And I didn't want him here for this." I gestured vaguely between us, the chasm that was now our marriage. "For what, Esther? For you to stage your little melodrama? For you to try and destroy our family?" He advanced on me, his control fraying. "You moved him out. You were planning this. The affair, the divorce papers. You were going to leave me and take my son." "There is no affair," I said, too tired to maintain the lie. "There is only your affair. And yes, I was going to leave you. I am leaving you." The admission, spoken aloud in the house we had built together, seemed to suck the remaining oxygen from the room. He stared at me, and I saw the last vestige of the man I'd married, the man who had loved me, who had held my hand during Jack's birth, finally die in his eyes. What was left was a stranger, an adversary. "Over my dead body," he said, his voice low and deadly. He turned and walked towards the kitchen, and I drifted after him, drawn into the final, inevitable confrontation. We ended up in our bedroom, the epicenter of our shared life. The room was a masterpiece of neutral tones and expensive linen, a stage set for a happy marriage that had never truly existed. It was the most sterile room in the house. He stood by the window, his back to me, looking out at the garden where, just months ago, our world had shattered. "You planned this," he said, his voice quiet now, laced with a kind of horrified respect. "You didn't just find out. You've been orchestrating. The lawyer. The cash. Moving Jack. setting me up at Kimberly's. You planned it like a partisan. A bloody guerrilla war in our own home. I didn't deny it. I stood by the bed, my arms wrapped around myself, the coldness inside me a shield against his words. What did you expect me to do, Harvey? My voice was calm, eerily so. Thank you? Appreciate the metaphor? The hearth and the fire? Did you think I would just keep the home fires burning while you went out to play with matches? He spun around, his eyes blazing. I provided for you. I gave you this. He gestured wildly around the room, at the house, at the life. Everything you have is because of me. Everything I have is a cage you built, I countered, the ice in my voice matching the ice in my heart. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a curator. A keeper. You wanted me docile and grateful, so you made sure I had no job, no money, no way out. You made me dependent so you could be free. That's not true, isn't it? You said it yourself to Brian. I had nowhere to go. No guts to leave. You built my prison and then mocked me for being a prisoner. The truth of it echoed in the spacious room. He had no rebuttal because there was none. He had been caught in his own arrogant, unguarded confession. His shoulders slumped, but it wasn't a gesture of defeat. It was the gathering of a new kind of strength. He walked towards me, stopping a few feet away. The early morning light was beginning to filter through the window, casting long, distorted shadows. This changes things, Esther, he said, his gaze dropping to my stomach. The baby changes everything. It changes nothing, I whispered, but the words lacked conviction. The ghost of that heartbeat was still there, a tiny, insistent drum. It changes the divorce, he said, his voice regaining its lawyerly precision. It changes custody. A pregnant mother, unstable, causing scenes, getting into car accidents. The courts won't look kindly on that. They'll question your fitness. They'll want to ensure a stable home environment for both children. The threat was explicit. He would use the pregnancy against me. He would paint me as an unfit mother to get custody of Jack and control over the new baby. You wouldn't, I breathed, true terror seizing me for the first time. Jack was my world. The thought of losing him was a pain beyond any betrayal. I will do whatever it takes to protect my family, he said, and the hypocrisy was so vast it was almost impressive. Starting with this baby. I won't let you destroy it. It took me a moment to understand his meaning. When I did, the blood drained from my face. Destroy it. That's what you were thinking, wasn't it? He accused, his eyes boring into mine. In the hospital. I saw it on your face. You see this child as an obstacle. A chain. You were thinking of getting rid of it. The directness of the accusation, the invasion of my most private, desperate thought, left me speechless. My silence was all the confirmation he needed. A strange, possessive light came into his eyes. I won't allow it, Esther. This is my child. You will not terminate this pregnancy. The shift was complete. The conversation was no longer about our broken marriage. It was about my body, my autonomy. He was no longer just my betrayer. He was my warden, claiming ownership of the life inside me. You don't get to allow me to do anything. Harvey, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. This is my body. And that is my child, he roared, finally losing the last of his composure. And I will fight you in every court in this country to protect it. If you so much as step foot near a clinic, I will have you declared mentally incompetent and have Jack taken away from you. Do you understand me? The words hung in the air, a legal and emotional death sentence. He meant it. Every word. The man who had cheated, who had lied, who had belittled and betrayed me, was now positioning himself as the righteous protector of the family. He would use the full force of his money and influence to crush me. I saw my future then, not as a free woman, but as a ghost in the machine of Harvey's life. Trapped. Pregnant. Fighting a draining, expensive legal battle for the right to raise my own children. The war chest in the tampon box was a pathetic pittance against the arsenal he could deploy. The love was dead. The revenge fantasy was over. All that was left was the cold, hard reality of survival. I looked at him, this stranger in my husband's skin, and I knew that the easy escape I had dreamed of was a fantasy. Freedom would not be a clean break. It would be a long, bloody, and painful siege. A father like you, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a shard of glass, is not what he needs. It's not what any child needs. He flinched as if I'd struck him. It was the one blow I could land that truly hurt him. His identity as a father was the one part of his facade that was, perhaps, not entirely a lie. He had no answer. We stood there, two adversaries in the ruins of our marriage, with the dawn breaking outside and the echo of a tiny, galloping heartbeat between us. The crash, the confrontation, the discovery, they were not the end. They were the opening salvos in a new, more terrible war. The divorce papers were just the first skirmish. The real battle for my body, for my freedom, for my children had only just begun. Some betrayals don't just break your heart, they poison the very ground you stand on, ensuring that nothing can ever truly grow there again. And I was standing in the toxic waste of our life together, knowing I would have to fight for every breath of clean air from now on. The curtain had fallen on our marriage, but the long, grim theater of the aftermath was just beginning.